The alien commander sat alone in the dark chamber, his eyes fixed on the stars beyond the glass wall. 60 years had passed since the war with humans, but in his heart, the memories still burned. He was old now, his scales dull with age, his hands trembling with the weight of battles long over. Yet one memory was sharper than all the others, one face he could never forget. He remembered the battlefield, the smoke, the fire, the cries of the dying. He remembered the human, the one who had stood beside him when enemies closed in from every side. A human warrior with eyes full of stubborn light, a man who should have been his enemy, but became his ally. He remembered holding him in his arms, blood spilling from his wounds, his life fading away. The human's last breath had been a whisper, a promise of something more, and then silence. That was the day the commander swore he would never forget. Now, in this quiet chamber, he thought of that moment again. He thought of the last words the human had spoken, words he never told anyone. He whispered them into the emptiness. "You died in my arms." The words tasted of sorrow, of guilt, of respect. The doors of the chamber opened with a hiss. Soldiers stepped inside, nervous, restless, their weapons ready. At first, the commander thought it was another report, another meaningless duty. But then he saw him. A figure walked into the light, a figure that made the commander's heart stop. The same face, the same eyes, the same human he had buried in memory 60 years ago. Unchanged, unaged, untouched by time. He looked as if the years had never touched him, as if death had been only a dream. The commander rose to his feet, his voice caught in his throat. Every soldier in the room froze. Some gasped, some whispered in fear. The commander's chest tightened as the human smiled faintly. That smile was the same as it had been on the battlefield long ago. It was impossible, it was madness, and yet it was real. The commander said, his voice shaking with disbelief. "You died in my arms." The human tilted his head, calm, steady, almost gentle. "And yet," he said, "I stand here before you." The soldiers raised their weapons, their hands trembling. Some shouted that this was a trick, a ghost, a clone made to deceive. The commander raised his hand for silence, though his own mind was storming with doubt. He stared at the man he had once known, the man he had lost. His heart told him it was real, but his mind screamed it was impossible. He stepped closer, his breath heavy, his eyes scanning every detail. The hair, the scars, even the way the human stood was the same. No mistake, no lie could copy it so perfectly. And yet the truth could not be. The commander's memories crashed into him like waves. He remembered the sound of gunfire, the enemy breaking through. He remembered the human's body collapsing, his blood soaking the alien's hands. He remembered the stillness, the cold, the end. There was no doubt then, no chance he had survived. And now, 60 years later, here he was standing alive. The soldiers murmured in fear. One shouted, "This is forbidden science." Another whispered, "It is a curse." But none dared to move, none dared to act until the commander gave the word. The human raised his hand slowly, not in surrender, but in peace. "I bring no harm," he said, his voice calm. "I come only with truth." The commander's heart raced, for he knew that voice. It was the same voice that had spoken to him in death, the same voice that had whispered, "Do not forget me." The room seemed to grow colder, silence heavy between them. The commander felt the weight of 60 years pressed down on his chest. The war, the loss, the memory of death, all of it returned with this one impossible figure. He wanted to demand answers, to shout, to accuse. But all he could do was whisper again, "You died." The human stepped closer, his eyes never leaving the commander's. "Perhaps," he said, "but death is not always the end." The soldiers shifted uneasily, fear spreading through them like fire. The commander clenched his fists, torn between fear and longing. If this was real, if this was truly the man he remembered, then everything he knew about life and death was a lie. The chamber was silent, but the air was alive with tension. The commander stared at him, heart pounding like a drum of war. For the first time in 60 years, he felt the same confusion he had felt on the battlefield, the same sense that destiny was not yet finished with them. And as the human stood there, unchanged, unbroken by time, the commander understood one thing. This was only the beginning. The human stood still in the middle of the chamber, calm, as if time itself had carried him there. The soldiers kept their weapons pointed at him, their hands shaking, their voices low with fear. They waited for the order to fire, but the commander gave none. His eyes were locked on the figure before him, a ghost wrapped in flesh. "You should not exist," the commander said, his voice heavy with years of war and loss. "You died in my arms." The words echoed through the chamber, chilling every ear that heard them. The soldiers looked at each other, wondering if their leader had lost his mind. But the human only tilted his head, a faint smile touching his lips. "Yet I stand here," he said softly. His voice carried no fear, no arrogance, only certainty. It was the same voice that had whispered on the battlefield 60 years ago, the voice of a dying man who should not be alive. The commander stepped forward, his chest burning with anger and confusion. He wanted to strike him, to touch him, to prove he was real, but he stopped, afraid that if he reached out, the figure would vanish like smoke. "What are you?" he demanded. "Are you some trick of the humans? A weapon to break our minds?" The human's eyes narrowed, but his tone never wavered. "I'm what you remember," he said. "I'm the man who fell in your arms. And yet I am not. You can call me human, but I am something more now." Whispers spread among the soldiers. Some spoke of forbidden cloning, others of curses that walk in living flesh. One young soldier shouted, "Commander, give the word. Let us end this ghost." But the commander silenced him with a single glance. The alien leader circled the human, studying him like a predator testing its prey. Every detail was the same. The scars on his hands, the steady way he breathed. No machine could copy such life. No puppet could hold such fire in its eyes. And yet it was impossible. "Tell me why you are here," the commander growled. "Tell me why you mock the dead with your presence." The human's expression darkened. "I did not come to mock. I came because the silence is ending. What is buried will rise again." The words struck like lightning through the chamber. The soldiers stiffened, confused by his cryptic warning. But the commander felt a chill deep inside, a memory of shadows in the war. The human had spoken once of enemies greater than aliens or mankind, enemies that hunted life itself. "You speak in riddles," the commander said, though his heart knew it was not so. "What silence? What rises?" The human took a step closer. The soldiers raised their weapons higher. But the commander did not move. He let him speak. "The war you remember," the human said, "was not the true war. It was only the cover, the smoke before the fire. The ones who brought me back, they knew the real enemy was only sleeping." The chamber fell in his silence, broken only by the hiss of the air systems. The commander's mind spun with doubt and fear. Could it be true? Could the endless battles of his youth have been only shadows on a greater wall? "You expect me to believe this?" the commander hissed. "You expect me to believe you crawled back from death to bring me fairy tales?" The human's eyes hardened. "You held me as I died. Do you think I wanted this life?" "No, Commander, I was taken, broken, rebuilt. Every day since that moment, I waited for the time they would rise again. And now, that time is near." The soldiers began to argue, their fear spilling into shouts. Some called him a liar. Others begged the commander to kill him. The air was thick with tension, the chamber trembling under the weight of too many truths and too many doubts. The commander raised his hand, and silence fell. He stepped close, so close he could see the human's breath. "If what you say is true," he whispered, "then why come to me? Why not to your own kind?" The human looked into his eyes, steady and calm. "Because they will not listen," he said. "Humans have forgotten what sleeps beneath the stars. But you remember, Commander. You saw the shadows once, in the smoke of war. You know I do not lie." The commander's blood ran cold. Yes, he remembered. In the darkest days of the war, there were moments he could not explain, ships that vanished without fire, soldiers turned to dust and silence, whispers of an enemy that was never seen. He had buried those memories as fear, as madness. But now, standing before this man, he knew they were real. The human stretched out his hand, open, steady. "Once you trusted me in death," he said. "Will you trust me now in life?" The chamber went silent, every soldier watching, every heart pounding. The commander's hands shook, torn between rage and memory. He wanted to order the man killed, but deep inside, he knew the truth. The impossible had returned, and with it, the shadows of something far worse. And as the commander hesitated, the alarms blared. A warning from the orbiting fleet. Unidentified signals, strange energy approaching from the void. The commander's heart froze, his eyes locked on the human. This was no trick, no curse. This was the beginning of something far greater. The commander closed his eyes, but the past did not stay buried. The human's words had torn open old wounds, and memories flooded back like a river breaking its dam. The chamber faded, the soldier's whispers vanished, and he was once more on the battlefield 60 years ago. The sky burned red with fire, ships falling like broken stars. The ground shook under the march of machines, the cries of the dying mixing with the roar of weapons. It had been a war of hate, alien against human, world against world. And yet in that chaos, one man had stood out. He remembered seeing him first on the ridge. A human soldier, wounded but unbroken, rallying his men when all others fled. His body was fragile, his kind weaker than the alien armies, but his spirit burned brighter than any fire. The commander had expected him to fall quickly, but instead, the human carved his way through the battlefield like a flame through dry grass. At first, they were enemies, their blades clashing, their eyes filled with rage. But something strange happened in that fight. The commander saw no hatred in the human's eyes, only determination. And when the greater enemy descended, when shadows darker than war itself spread across the sky, it was the human who turned and fought beside him. The commander remembered that day clearly. The ground splitting open, silence falling over the battlefield. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of fear. Creatures had appeared, not human, not alien, but something else. Shapes that bent the air, shadows that seemed to eat sound. Soldiers from both sides had vanished in moments, as if swallowed by the void. Neither side understood what they faced, only that it was not of this world. He remembered the human's voice cutting through the terror. "Fight with me," he had said, "or we will both be nothing." And so, for the first time, alien and human had stood shoulder to shoulder. Side by side, they pushed back against the nameless threat. It was not victory, not truly, but survival. And in survival, respect was born. The commander remembered the weight of his blade beside the human's weapon, the rhythm of battle, the sound of two warriors breathing as one. And in that moment, enemies became allies, bound not by blood, but by fire. Yet the war did not end with that day. The greater enemy vanished as suddenly as it appeared, leaving behind only fear and questions. The alien armies turned once more against the humans, unable to accept what had happened. But the commander never forgot the shadows, and he never forgot the man who fought beside him. He remembered the last night, the final stand, the human wounded, bleeding but still fighting. He remembered carrying him through the ruins, walls falling, fire chasing them. He remembered the human's blood soaking into his scales, warm, heavy, real. And then, the moment when the light in his eyes dimmed, the commander could still hear the words whispered into his ear, "Do not forget me." Simple words, but they burned like iron. He had held the man until his last breath, until his body went still. There was no doubt then, no trick, no illusion. The human had died, and yet, here he was alive, unchanged. The memory clashed with the present like two storms colliding. The commander's mind reeled, torn between truth and madness. But the strangest thing was not the memory of the man's death. It was the memory of the shadows, the way they had moved without sound, the way they had swallowed whole battalions. Back then, both armies had sworn never to speak of it. The war had been rewritten as alien against human, nothing more. The shadows were erased from history. But the commander remembered. And now, standing before the man who should be dead, he wondered if the shadows had been the reason. Had they taken him? Had they returned him? Was this human truly alive, or only a vessel of something darker? The flashback faded. The chamber returned. The soldiers stood waiting, their weapons still raised, their fear thick in the air. The commander's heart pounded as if he had fought a battle all over again. His eyes locked on the man before him, the man who had once been his enemy, his ally, his dying friend, now alive, now unchanged, now speaking of an enemy rising again. The commander's breath shook as he whispered to himself, "I remember." The human's gaze softened, as if he already knew what the alien had seen in his mind. "You were there," the human said. "You saw them too. You know the war we fought was never the true war." The chamber grew still. The commander's soldiers looked at each other in confusion. But the commander himself felt only fear. Because the man was right, and the memory he had buried was clawing its way back into the light. The chamber was silent, heavy with fear and memory. The commander's breath came slow and uneven, his heart caught between the past and the impossible present. He had seen this man die. He had buried him in memory, yet here he stood, alive, unchanged, untouched by time. "You are not what you seem," the commander said at last, his voice rough. "No flesh survives 60 years without aging. No soldier returns from death without reason." He stepped closer, his shadow stretching across the floor like a beast ready to strike. "What are you?" The human did not flinch, his eyes steady, his voice calm. "I am what I was," he said, "but I am also something new." He raised his hand slowly, showing no weapon, only flesh that looked too real, too alive. "Look at me," he whispered, "and tell me if I lie." The commander's soldiers shifted, their weapons trembling. One hissed, "It is a trick of human science." Another muttered, "A ghost in flesh." But none dared to move, for their commander's silence bound them like chains. The human lowered his hand and took a single step forward. "Do you remember the shadows?" he asked. The commander's chest tightened, the memory still raw from the flashback that had clawed through his mind. "Yes," he said at last, his voice low. "I remember." The soldiers stiffened, for most of them had never heard their commander speak with such weight. The human nodded slowly, as though he had expected nothing less. "They did not leave when the war ended," he said. "They only slept, hidden in the deep places where no eye dares to look. But before they vanished, they took me." The words cut through the air like a blade. The commander's heart stopped for a moment, his mind fighting the meaning. "They took you," he growled. "You mean you died?" "No," the human said quickly, his voice sharp. "I died, yes, but death was not the end. They pulled me from the moment of my last breath. They remade me in ways I still do not understand. When I awoke, I was not in the world of men, nor in the world of your kind. I was in silence, in darkness, where even time refused to move." The soldiers began to murmur in fear. The commander silenced them with a glance, but even he felt his throat grow dry. "What do you mean?" he demanded. "What did they make you into?" The human's face grew hard, the calm mask breaking for the first time. "I wish I knew," he said. "I bleed as I once did. I breathe as I once did, but I do not age. 60 years have passed, yet the mirror shows me as I was that day. I am not a ghost, not a machine, but I am not the man you held in your arms either. I am something that should not exist." The commander's stomach twisted, his mind torn between fear and pity. To see a man live beyond death was horror, but to see him speak with sorrow was worse. The human's eyes were not cold, not cruel, but heavy with the weight of knowing he no longer belonged to any world. You expect me to believe this? The commander asked, though his voice cracked with doubt. You expect me to believe that the shadows remade you, and now you come here with warnings of doom? The human's gaze hardened. No, he said, I do not expect you to believe. I expect you to remember. The chamber seemed to grow colder at those words. The commander's skin crawled as the memory of that battle pressed into him again. The silence, the vanishing soldiers, the shadows that devoured life. He had buried the truth for 60 years, called it madness, but now the man before him dragged it back into the light. You know what I say is true, the human said. They're stirring again. The silence is breaking. I can feel it. That is why I came back, not for your people, not even for mine, but for the living who will vanish if we remain blind. The commander clenched his fists, fury mixing with fear. You were taken by them, shaped by them. How do I know you are not their weapon? The human's jaw tightened, his voice low, heavy. You do not know. Perhaps I am. Perhaps I am nothing but their seed placed in your world. But if that is true, then why do I stand before you and not kill you where you breathe? The commander froze, his mind caught by the weight of that question. The soldiers glanced at one another, their fear now twisting into doubt. If this man was an enemy's weapon, then why stand unarmed? Why speak of warnings instead of slaughter? The human stepped closer, close enough that the commander could see the faint scar under his eye. The same scar he had seen 60 years ago. I came here, the human said, because you're the only one who remembers. Your people buried the truth, mine drowned it in lies. But you, he pointed at the commander's chest, you held me when I died. You know I speak no falsehood. The enemy is not coming, commander. The enemy is already here. The words dropped like stone into the silence. The commander felt the floor tilt beneath him, his breath heavy. And then, without warning, the chamber lights flickered. The walls groaned, as if something vast pressed against them from outside. The soldiers turned in panic, weapons rising. But the human did not move, his eyes locked on the commander, steady as stone. Now, he said softly, you must choose. Do you see me as a weapon, or as a warning? The lights flickered again, dimming to a sickly glow. A low hum filled the chamber, not from the walls or the machines, but from somewhere deeper, somewhere alive. The soldiers tightened their grip on their weapons, their eyes darting toward every shadow. The commander stood still, his body tense, his heart pounding. This was no ordinary tremor, no ordinary sound. The human did not move, his gaze fixed on the floor, as though he felt something others could not. They are close, he said, his voice quiet but certain. They have already found me. The soldiers muttered in panic. One shouted, he brought them here. Another cried out, he is their beacon. Kill him before it is too late. But before the commander could give an order, the air changed. It grew heavy, thick, pressing against lungs and skin. The sound of the world outside faded, as if the chamber itself had been cut away from reality. Then came the silence, that same silence the commander remembered from 60 years ago. It felt like a blade, sharp, unnatural. Even the breath of soldiers seemed swallowed before it left their lips. The commander's heart froze, the memories slamming back into him. The battlefield, the shadows, the vanishing soldiers. It was the same. Exactly the same. The human lifted his head slowly, his eyes calm though the room shook with fear. Do you feel it now? He asked. Do you remember? The commander clenched his jaw, unwilling to speak the truth, but his silence was enough. One soldier broke rank, his fear exploding into madness. He screamed and fired at the human, bolts of energy tearing through the air. The blast struck the man's chest, searing his flesh. He staggered, fell to his knees, smoke rising from his wounds. The soldiers gasped in relief, believing him destroyed. But then, slowly, impossibly, he stood. The wounds glowed faintly, then sealed shut before their eyes. The scars vanished as though they had never been. Gasps turned to terror, weapons raised again. But the human only raised a hand and whispered, "Not me. They are already here." And then the shadows came, not as creatures with faces or claws, but as ripples in the air, dark shapes sliding across the walls, bending the light. They moved without sound, swallowing space itself. One soldier screamed as his body was lifted, twisted, and gone. Not torn, not burned, simply gone, as if he had been erased. Chaos erupted, soldiers firing in every direction, their weapons flaring against the dark. But the shadows absorbed the blast, swallowed the energy like water, taking flame. The chamber filled with panic, the silence broken by screams, by the sound of weapons that did nothing. The commander roared above the chaos, his voice deep and commanding. "Hold your ground." But even he felt the cold claw of fear digging into his chest. He had seen this before, and he knew how quickly it ended in death. The human stepped toward him, his face set with grim certainty. "They are not here for you," he said. "They are here for me." The commander's eyes narrowed. "Then you have cursed us all." But even as he said it, a shadow lunged toward him. The human moved faster than thought, pulling him aside. The darkness passed where he had stood, leaving only a burn on the stone. The commander stared at him, breathing hard. "You fight them?" he asked. The human nodded once. "I fight because I have no choice. If I do not, then everything you know will vanish." Another soldier vanished into the dark, his scream cut short. The chamber shuddered, as though something vast pressed against it from outside. Through the glass wall, the stars bent and twisted, black shapes blotting out the light. Ships in orbit fired their weapons, but the blasts vanished before reaching their targets. The silence swallowed it all. The commander's throat tightened. This was worse than before, stronger, hungrier. He turned to the human, his voice low and urgent. "If they want you, then why stand here? Why not leave and draw them away?" The human's gaze hardened. "Because leaving will not save you. They have already marked this place. Once they awaken, they do not stop. You saw it before, Commander. You know this truth. There is no running." The commander felt the weight of those words press down on him. For 60 years he had buried the fear, convinced himself the shadows had vanished. But now he saw they had only waited, growing stronger in their sleep. The soldiers were dying one by one, the chamber falling apart. And in the chaos, the human turned to the commander and spoke with urgency. "There is only one path. You must stand with me again, as you once did, or all will fall." The commander's eyes burned with rage and confusion. The human, the one who should be dead, asked him to fight again, to fight an enemy no weapon could touch. It was madness, and yet he knew it was the only truth. As another shadow ripped through the chamber wall, the commander raised his blade. His voice thundered through the chaos. "Soldiers, stand with me." The human's eyes flashed, not with triumph, but with grim recognition. The war they had buried was beginning again. The chamber was breaking apart, walls groaning as shadows poured in like a storm of night. Soldiers screamed, firing wildly, their bolts swallowed by the dark. The commander's blade struck through one shape, but it passed without resistance, like striking smoke. The enemy could not be killed, only endured. The human stood at the center of the chaos, his eyes glowing faintly in the flickering light. He raised his hand, and for a moment the shadows recoiled, not from any weapon, but from him. The silence cracked, a tremor running through the chamber. And in that breath, the soldiers froze, staring. For the first time, the shadows hesitated. The commander seized the moment, his voice a roar. "What are you?" The human's face twisted with pain, his voice low, urgent. "You wanted truth," he said. "Then listen, though it may break you." He spread his arms wide, and the air shimmered. His body glowed faintly, lines of light racing across his skin like veins of fire. Not human, not alien, something in between, something born of death and silence. "I did die," he said, his voice echoing strangely, not only in the chamber, but in the soldiers' minds. "I felt life leave me, felt the end, but the shadows did not let me go. They caught me in that last breath. They broke me into pieces and rebuilt me from what remained. The commander's throat tightened. What did they make you into? The human's eyes burned with sorrow. Not their servant, not their slave. Something they feared, yet could not destroy. I am their mistake. The chamber shook, the shadows screaming without sound. The soldiers clutched their heads, their eyes bleeding from the pressure of that silence. The human's voice cut through it like fire. They exist beyond life and death. They do not kill, they erase. To them, flesh is nothing, time is nothing. They devour memory, they devour being. But when they touched me, I did not vanish. I remained. His chest flared with light, and in that glow the shadows faltered, pulling back. The soldiers gasped, some dropping to their knees. The commander stared in shock. You are a weapon against them. The human shook his head slowly. No, Commander, I am not their enemy by design. I am their wound, a piece of silence that broke. They cannot claim me, but neither can I return to what I was. The shadows pressed harder against the walls, their shapes swelling. The chamber's glass cracked, stars bending beyond it. The human's voice grew harsher, his eyes blazing. They are not alive as you know life. They are hunger given form, and once they awaken fully, they do not stop. Worlds vanish, entire histories swallowed as though they never were. That is what you and I fought that day. Not war, not politics, but extinction. The commander's fists clenched, his heart pounding with fury and fear. You should have stayed dead, he spat. Better a grave than this cursed half-life. The human's face twisted, grief shadowing his words. Do you think I chose this? Every day I wake knowing I should not exist. Every day I feel the silence inside me, whispering, but if I am a curse, then I am one that can fight them. And that is why I came. Another soldier screamed as a shadow pulled him into nothing, his voice ending mid-breath. The commander's blade shook in his hand, rage boiling in him. He turned to the human, his voice a growl. Why me? Why not your people? Why come to the one who hated you most? The human stepped closer, his light cutting a path through the dark. Because you remember, he said. You were there when they came. You saw them. You know the truth. Your people erased it, mine buried it. But you, his voice broke like thunder. You cannot lie to yourself. You know the war we fought was never the true war. The commander's chest heaved, his breath sharp. He remembered the silence, the soldiers vanishing, the shadows no one dared speak of. Yes, he remembered. And now, the truth stood before him, alive in the man who should have died. The chamber groaned again, the walls splitting, black tendrils forcing their way inside. The human raised his hand, his body flaring brighter, holding the dark at bay. But sweat poured from his skin, his strength fading. They're stronger now, he said, his voice raw. Stronger than when we last faced them. If you doubt me, then we are already lost. But if you believe, if you fight with me again, then maybe, just maybe, there's hope. The commander's soldiers looked at him with wide eyes, desperate, afraid, waiting for his word. His blade felt heavy, his heart heavier. The human's glow burned before him, a curse and a shield all at once. The commander growled deep in his chest, torn between hatred and duty. He had once watched this man die. Now he watched him hold back the end of all things. And in that moment, he understood this was not a man, not an enemy, not even an ally. This was the key to survival, or the key to ruin. The chamber walls split, black tendrils forcing their way through cracks like roots of a dying tree. The floor shuddered, lights flickered, and the silence pressed against every soldier's chest like a heavy hand. One by one, the weapons fell quiet, useless against the tide of shadows that swallowed every bolt of fire. The human stood at the center, glowing faintly, his body the only light the dark could not consume. His breath came sharp and heavy, sweat running down his face. The commander saw him tremble, not with fear, but with strain. Every pulse of light he gave pushed the shadows back for only a moment. It was not enough, not for long. Outside the chamber's glass wall, the stars twisted. Shapes moved against the void, vast ships that blotted out the light. Not alien, not human, something far older. Their hulls were jagged, shifting, alive with shadow. They were not built, they were grown, and they were countless. Alarms roared through the base, red lights spinning, voices screaming over the comms. Unidentified fleet descending, shields collapsing, energy weapons ineffective. The sound cut to static, as though the universe itself swallowed the words. The commander's soldiers looked to him, terror in their eyes. Some begged for retreat. Others whispered prayers to gods long forgotten. But the commander said nothing, his eyes locked on the man before him. This impossible human, this living scar of silence. The human turned to him, his face pale, his glow dimming. "You see now," he said, voice low, "they are here. This is only the beginning." The commander's blade shook in his hand, his rage boiling to the surface. "You brought this curse to my people," he growled. "You returned with death at your side." The human's gaze did not waver. "They would have come with or without me. The difference is that now you're not blind. Now you have a chance." Another soldier vanished into the dark, his scream cut short. The commander roared, his voice breaking through the panic. "Form ranks. Do not break." But even he knew his words were ash. Against shadows, ranks meant nothing. The human staggered, his knees buckling. The commander rushed forward without thinking, catching him as he fell. The memory struck like lightning. 60 years ago, he had held this same body as life faded away. Now he held it again, alive yet broken. History repeating itself in cruel circles. The human's hand gripped his arm, his voice trembling but fierce. "Commander," he whispered, "I cannot hold them alone. Choose now. Trust me, or watch everything end." The commander's heart thundered. To trust him was madness. To deny him was death. Every instinct screamed to strike him down, to call him a lie. But his eyes, those same human eyes, burned with the same fire he had seen on the battlefield long ago. The fire of one who would not surrender, even to silence. The shadows pressed closer, the chamber splitting apart. From the glass wall came a crack like thunder. One of the vast ships outside turned, its form blotting out the stars entirely. For a moment, the universe vanished, replaced only by darkness. The human pushed against the commander's chest, standing on shaking legs. His glow brightened, fire racing through the lines under his skin. He raised his arms wide, and the shadows hissed, recoiling from him. Every soldier stared in shock, torn between fear and awe. This was no ordinary man, no ordinary ghost. This was something forged from the silence itself. The human's voice thundered, louder than before. "You trusted me once in death," he shouted. "Will you trust me now in life?" The commander's throat tightened, the weight of the choice crushing him. His soldiers looked to him, their fate hanging on his word. His mind screamed no, but his heart whispered yes. The war he thought had ended was beginning again. And this man, this cursed human, was the only shield they had. He raised his blade high, his voice breaking with fury and fire. "Stand with him," he roared. "Stand and fight, or we are nothing." The soldiers roared in answer. Their fear turned to desperate courage. The human's glow flared brighter, pushing the shadows back. For a moment, the silence cracked, the chamber filled with light. But beyond the wall, the vast ships moved closer. 1,000 black forms descending, hungering, endless. The commander's chest heaved as he stared into the void. For the first time in 60 years, he felt the true war begin. And he knew this was only the first breath of a storm that would devour worlds. The human turned to him, eyes blazing. "This is not survival," he said. "This is the beginning of resistance." And then the glass wall shattered. The stars vanished. The shadows poured in like a flood. The screen went black. The story cut to silence.